The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I'm your host, Bobby Williams. It's good to have you here. You know what else is good? Subscribing to the show and leaving us a review on Apple. Thank you. Big news for me personally this week. I released my first children's book. It's called Bobby and the Supersonic Music Machine. Bobby, coincidentally named, has one dream: to perform on stage with a supersonic music machine. It's a story about friendship, about troubleshooting, about creativity. I think you'll like it. So I encourage you to go to Amazon.com, look up Bobby and the Supersonic Music Machine. I put a lot of work into this. Today we are talking about raising teenage young women. A lot of brain development happening during this time, a lot of societal pressure and influences. How can you raise your daughter to have a sense of self-worth and confidence? Our guest today is Nellie Harden. Nellie is an author, hosts parenting workshops, and is the mother of 4 teen daughters. I encourage you to check out her upcoming workshop, the Daughter Decoder. Go to NellieHarden.com to learn about this and all the other amazing work that Nellie's doing. Let's get into it. To recap what you're saying, young men can compartmentalize different parts of their day. They might just think about a specific hour or something, but a young woman is thinking about like 5 things at once.
Yeah, or more. And so, I mean, just to put this into practical context, you have your daughter come home from school and you're like, "So how was the day?" And they're like, "Oh my goodness, there was this thing that happened in Spanish class, but then at lunchtime this thing happened, and then when I was trying to study for English, somebody spilled a drink on me." And it's right, it is just spilling over, and the words aren't even coming out as whole words sometimes because they're trying to speak so much. It's like a fire hose trying to come out all at the same time. Whereas and these are mass generalizations, of course, but we're just talking about one side of the pendulum and the other, right? And then a young man can come home and you'll be like, "How was school?" "Fine." "So did you do anything today?" "Yeah, in, first hour we did this," right? And then hours go by and then you're sitting at the dinner table and they're like, "Oh man, when I was in 6th hour today or whatever, this all happened, and you're like, "I asked you when you came home, what happened?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I just didn't think about it." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's patience that parents need to use in different ways depending on who you're dealing with your kids, especially if you have young men and young women in your home.
Well, we talk a lot about the prefrontal cortex on this show,
Mm,
and what that part of your brain does sort of gives you the ability to think about how what you're doing now impacts your future. And that's something teens just aren't good at yet. But are there like systems you can put in place to like help them, or how do you counteract that lack of brain development?
absolutely. And so right now, like you said, that's exactly right. Their brains are under development. So as a parent, when you look at your child and you're like, "I do not understand why you're doing that," you literally don't, because your brain is in a different place than them, and that's okay. And we can't expect them to have that forethought, just like you're saying, to consequences that might be happening like we do, because that part of the brain is not fully functioned. And when that part of the brain is not fully functioning yet, they rely on the amygdala, which is your fight or flight. And so when they make a decision, they're all in, and they are running in that direction no matter what. And they aren't really thinking about the consequences. They just feel like a bear, an emotional bear, hopefully not a real bear, is chasing them in the behind them. So What you can do is set up these very simple systems. If you do any studying on short-term memory or even long-term memory that comes from short-term, really 3 to 5 at most points is all that you want to have, right? 3 is kind of the magic number there. It's really easy for your child to think of 3 or 4 things at a time. Like I said, 5 at max, then thinking about 7 or what have you. In fact, that's why phone numbers way back when they started getting invented were broken down into 3, 3, and 4 in the United States, because it's easier to remember. So when you're thinking about these things, you can give them a system to think about or to use in their thought process to go from how they're feeling to what they're thinking to how they're feeling, what decisions they're making in their behavior. And then those consequences will come from that. And it's this big cycle. For young women, I call it the HALT cycle. It's her aligned living thoughts. But it's a process that you can give them to fill in that gap between where you are now and until you can really think and understand consequences. Let's give you this system to work through so that you can have more awareness about what's going on in your brain and you don't get so overwhelmed and your resulting behavior isn't just out of this frenzy that's happening.
So what is like the conversation you have then? You say to your child, like, when you're feeling worked up, think about your feelings. Like, what's the X, Y, and Z there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things that you can ask is, there's so many things that come from thoughts, right? And thoughts are coming from everywhere outside of you. It's coming from things you've been told. It's coming from what you believe is true, all of those things. And what you want to do is ask yourself, is this really true? And especially for young women, we got that spaghetti brain, right? The white matter. It's really easy to feel like something is true, but it's not true. And what they feel is true is going to be their truth. That's a lot of true in there, but it's true. No pun intended.
I hear you.
And so again, always bringing it back to the practical. If they walk in a classroom and they see a group of girls huddled in the corner and one of those girls turns and looks at them and then looks at you and then looks back at them and they continue talking, first thought that comes into your mind is they're talking about me. They don't like something that my hair is bad, I did something wrong, or they're being mean to me, I'm not worthy enough, right? And they could just have heard a noise, looked at you and come back, right? Or it might be the other case. But we have these first drafts of stories that are constantly going through our heads. And so one of the first things when your daughter's coming home and they are frantic and they are freaking out is this actually true? Like, do you know this to be fact? Not just feeling, but fact. And I'm like, oh, no, but I just know that this is true because, this, and this, and this. Well, all of that seems like feeling. And I'm not saying that you're not justified in your feelings because you definitely are. But I don't want you to be worked up about something that isn't actually true, because that's just a waste of all of your emotions right now. And I want to support you in what you're going through, but don't go through something that you don't have to, And so talking to them about that. And so is it actually true, right? Is what you're feeling actually serving you and who you're trying to become, right? If you aren't friends with those people, or like, do you care? Like, do you really care? Or is this just your self-worth that is speaking and screaming at you on the inside, right? So is this serving you? Is this serving the greater good? Is this serving who you are trying to become or who you're trying to be right now? And of course you use different language, whatever fits you. If someone listening comes up to their daughter and is like, is this serving your future self? Some daughters will look at me like, what are you talking about? But you can say it in your own language, however that feels natural to you. But those are some really big questions to just kind of turn the heat off the kettle and let things simmer for a little bit before you get into an actual discussion, because you never want to get into a discussion when emotions are high on either end, especially on both ends.
When you were talking, it made me think a lot about self-esteem and how do you instill a sense of self-worth in your child. I know you have some ideas about that, I'm sure.
Definitely. So there are 5 needs that every person in the world has. And especially because of that prefrontal cortex and all of that happening in our teens, they are electrified during this time. Okay. So every person, you included, that is listening right now, and you and me sitting here talking, but especially our teens, second half of childhood, they need to be seen and they need to be heard. They need to know that they're loved. They need to know that they actually belong somewhere, and they need to have a purpose. And that purpose doesn't mean like, I know my life purpose at, 12 years old or whatever. It could just mean I am going to, study for this test, or I am going to go over to so-and-so's house and hang out later, or I am going to go babysit, or whatever that is, just something that's ahead. Does that make sense? And so being seen and being heard, just those 5 things right there are the 5 biggest needs that your children have right now. And if we can fill those at home, and then we can teach them how to fill them themselves for themselves, and how to positively seek that out in the world, then we are really starting to set them up with that foundation of worth, esteem, and confidence that they need in order to go out into the world as a self-disciplined leader that knows how to love and lead themselves. So some practical, again, I always
Yeah,
bring
that
it
was
back
going
to
to
the
be my next question.
okay, yes.
Mhm.
So practical ways to do that. So when you're at home, you're sitting in the kitchen or on the island or whatever, and they come in, eye contact. Eye contact and say their name, right? They need to know that somebody knows them. And it seems so silly and something that you would assume. It's just like so many parents assume they know I love them. They know I love them. But do they? Like, you need to say it. And further than that, you need to show it while you're saying it too. And so there's a lot of assumptions that parents can have today. They know they can talk to me. I'm just, looking at my screen right now. Oops, I'm just looking at my screen right now, but they know I'm listening. I'm responding. Therefore, I'm listening. But that's not what listening looks like. And there's that really critical listening that they need to know. They need to know that they are worth being heard. Okay. They need to know that they're worth being seen. So when your kid comes downstairs and they're wearing something new, or they put their hair a different way, or they are going somewhere new, they're hanging out with a different friend, those are observations that you want to keep a log, not a written log of, although you can, but at least a mental log of. And you need to see those things happening, because the more invisible they feel, the more they are going to spiral down into a place that you don't want them to go and is not going to be healthy for them. So really hear them, really see them. An easy way for purpose in the family too is to help them with their role in the family. So if they're a big sister, big brother, little brother, whatever that is, or maybe they have a special gift for organizing, or I don't know, maybe they're good with finances or what have you. Those are things to point out and give them room to actually grow in your family. So one of my daughters is really good at organizing. She's good at many things, but she's good at organizing. So when we get the groceries, she has full reign to organize the pantry, and that's like her thing, right? And she takes it sounds silly, but she takes some pride and honor in that, and that's great. And then after it's done, I'm like, man, that looks really awesome. Thank you so much. Now I know how to find everything. But just the smallest things, just like that, can give them this purpose and feel seen and heard, and that worth can grow.
Self-esteem seems so important when your child is entering the dating world too, which is a hot button issue. And
Yes.
just thinking about like how do you get validation, or and when you're a parent where your child is dating for the first time, it's sort of untreaded water. Any just general tips or ideas for parents out there?
Yeah. Oh, I have 14 daughters, by the way, and that 14 daughters that are 13, 15, 15, and 17. So this is very much, in my world right now. And the questions that it's all about conversations and questions, being curious, right? letting them be heard, because you want to know what they want to get out of dating. And, quote unquote, you're going to hear everybody has a boyfriend and I don't, right? That's a very common thing that you're going to hear, or, everybody's going to this dance with somebody and I'm not. And, it's the every and all and never and always, all those absolutes, right? That, again, that amygdala, that's where they go for. And so asking them those questions of, well, why is that important to you? What does dating even mean to you? One of the worst things that we can do as a parent is assume that what our ideas are about something, such as dating or frankly anything, are the same as their ideas, because they are a separate person. We are not raising the miniature version of ourselves. In fact, I did hundreds of interviews of families all around the world last year in 2022. And there was a few common themes. And one of them was this problem that some parents were recognizing as, you know what, I realized not too long ago that all this time I've actually been trying to raise myself when I was a kid and filling in the gaps that I had, but they aren't the same gaps that my child has, right? And so that is an assumption right there that some parents are like, oh, well, I needed this when I was a kid, so therefore you need this, therefore we're going to go all in on this, right? But the same thing goes with dating. Why are you dating? What are you seeing in this person? Are you even interested in somebody? What does a date look like to you? What's the purpose? What's the long-term plan here, right? And those are really important conversations to have, and not in a staunchy, sterile, I'm big mom or dad, and you're this little tiny child that's insignificant and foolish. That's not how you want to approach something. We have one-on-one time with every single one of our kids every week. So on Tuesday and Thursday nights from 9 to 9:30, my husband and I go into one of their rooms, and they have assigned nights and they flip-flop. So every other week they go back and forth between mom and dad. And in that time, we usually do it in their bedrooms, to make their bedroom a safe place. It's okay if mom and dad come into the bedroom, right? We have fun. We sit on the bed. Sometimes they're more serious conversations. Sometimes it's just like, oh, what'd you see on TV lately, right? And it's just fun. But making those conversations relational and vulnerable for both of you is really, really important, because you don't want your child to look at you as, mom or dad, they know everything. They are the authority and I know nothing. And they think that I'm stupid and foolish and immature, and they know everything. You want it to, although a family is a team and you're the captains, parents are the captains, you want to be able to be like, oh, I remember when I was your age, it was really tough, right? It was really tough. My kids know every embarrassing story I've had, and I have plenty.
Well, you want them to feel empowered too. And I think
Yes.
when you're asking questions, sometimes there are things you just haven't thought about. And so a question makes you work something through your brain in a different way. And it's like, oh, what do I really think?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just what you see on TV. It's not just, what you see in other people. Because so many times when they quote unquote get what they want, they're not comfortable in that situation. They're like, oh, this is different than I thought it would be, because I just had this snapshot picture in my mind. I didn't actually think about me in this scenario, right? And then it gets uncomfortable and they don't feel safe, or they don't know what to say, or they don't know what to do. And so making sure that they are mature enough to have a relationship that goes back and forth, there is compromise, there's understanding, there's openness and conversation, values are on the same page, at least. All those things are really important.
Nellie, thank you so much for being here today. There's so many different lanes we could take this, but I
Yes.
appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Nellie, for taking the time to come here and share some information with us. Again, want to shout out Bobby and the Supersonic Music Machine. Look it up on Amazon.com. This has been the Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I'm Bobby Williams. We'll see you next week. Peace.